Good morning.
Good morning.
So, I arrived a bit later than usual this morning, and I was telling someone I have no idea how that happened. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning, and so I must have just really been living in the moment. That's all I can think. But here I am, and it was so wonderful when I opened the door and saw those smiling faces there, and no judgment. So, we're still talking about the spiritual power of judgment, and it really isn't about that kind of judgment, but that's what we first leap to when we say the word judgment, isn't it? Sometimes at Unity, because of that, we use other names for this. We also use the words wisdom and discernment. If you read my article in the newsletter this month, you read about an example of a time when my minister and I were definitely talking about two different kinds of discernment. So as I worked on this talk, I thought maybe I would explore and look deeper at that experience, and then I realized that this whole idea of the spiritual power of judgment is really about a trip we take from judgment to discernment. It's a continuum, I believe, that reflects where we are in our spiritual growth. It looks something like this, perhaps in a circle, not a straight line. And first is judgmental. Then judgment. Come on. Then judgment. Then wisdom. Then discernment without understanding. And finally, discernment with understanding. I can definitely track my own life around and across and back and forth on this circle. I've experienced all of them either as I used them or received them. And since we all move back and forth on this continuum, I'm just picking a starting place. And it has to do with my own spiritual journey. So I was born into a family of evangelical Christians and to a mother who was an avid churchgoer. I began being at church every time the doors were open, literally in the womb, and continued until my mid-20s, when a series of events caused me to ask questions and to move on into new thought finally. So the way I have come to describe that experience is as being quite judgmental and negative. Even though I'm overall grateful for the values and sense of security it gave me growing up in that environment, it always caused me to ask lots of questions. And I say this because it was based on seeing everyone as a wretched sinner, born into sin, and helpless and hopeless to create a life of wholeness without performing a series of actions. Some of them were based upon sheer deprivation and shame. Two things that I now believe never work well in forming a balanced, happy, spiritually fulfilled life. I was also encouraged to judge anyone who did not believe the way I believed as a hell-bound sinner, who had not found the one true way to God. And the best thing I could do would be to convince them that they were wrong and I was right, always, because it was the ultimate mission to save everyone from going to a place called hell. Well, I always had a couple of problems with this. First, that my God, who was the God of everything and who was by definition love, and I learned that there, would be that small, elitist, and limiting, and would just say, okay, you didn't get it right, into a dark place where you will burn forever. It was actually irrational to me. Even I can remember by the time I was about 10 going, this doesn't make any rational sense. It doesn't even agree with what they taught me. Jesus loves me and I should love everybody. None of this makes any sense to me. It was a belief system based totally on fear, which I had aplenty. And though there was a lot of talk about love, there was a whole lot of shaming and judgment going on. This kind of judgment is about comparisons. Leaving all of that dogma and just looking at being judgmental. Even disregarding any religious context. It happens when we compare how people are to how we think they should be. It's sometimes subtle, but it's real. Here's an example. You might say, she's very comfortable talking nonstop for 15 minutes. Or you can say, she can go on talking nonstop for 15 minutes. It can be subtle, but definitely a negative tone gives it away as being judgmental. And this is with friends. When we're talking about strangers, it's often no holds barred. Like, she could stand to lose some weight. Or, who picks his clothes for him? Does he have a mirror? I actually have said that one. Being judgmental is not stating an opinion or even labeling something as good or bad altogether. Being judgmental is when, based on one quality of someone or something, you draw a conclusion about their entire nature, about all their other qualities. You judge their wholeness based upon one aspect, like in this case, what they had to pull out of the drawer today to put on to wear, or the color of their skin, or the church they go to, or the country they come from. You get the idea. Okay, that's the first one. Now let's move to the next box. Judgment. How is this different from being judgmental? Well, this is what we talked about pretty much last time, this kind of judgment. And at this point in my spiritual evolution, I learned that there are plenty of assessments, evaluations, and decisions to be made that do require good judgment. So why use up all that judging energy trying to decide what everyone else should be up to? This kind of judgment is about making decisions based upon having the best information possible and relating it to your own beliefs and values. However, you may never check in with your source to use this kind of judgment, but it is less negative and more thoughtful than the previous judgmental state. If you have good judgment in this sense, you most likely give yourself time to think things through and don't make life decisions in a time of crisis. You probably listen to your gut feelings or intuition. You learn from others. And if you're a spiritual truth seeker, you may check in with your divine source. This kind of judgment is used to choose worthy goals and set proper priorities, thinking through the consequences of your actions and basing your decisions on practical wisdom and good sense. Good judgment can be described as the act of critical thinking without discrimination. Next on the circle is wisdom, spiritual wisdom. Sometimes, and in my case, after some practice and good judgment related to personal values and beliefs, we begin to understand that there are some absolute truths in the universe, that a certain kind of wisdom exists that suggests a better way to live and assess the circumstances or people, places, and things in our life. Better than being judgmental or even just using good common sense as in judgment. We start to know that there are good and not so good ways to be and live, and begin to try to live our lives according to the better ways. We make our judgments with real, absolute spiritual wisdom. James 3:13 says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life and your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom." The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. Wisdom, especially spiritual wisdom, is not just about knowing what's good for you, but applying that knowledge in your everyday life. It makes us think of the fifth unity principle, which says knowing and understanding the laws of life, also called truth, are not enough. A person must also live the truth he or she knows. So once we've crossed the wisdom line, we're into truly living our beliefs when we make judgments. Charles Fillmore said in the 12 Powers of Man, "When we awaken to the reality of our being, we know the truth. We find our judgment faculty." In other words, once we become aware of our Christ consciousness, we start to make judgments based upon spiritual wisdom. A wise person develops many qualities such as love for what is good and true, humility, integrity, compassion, empathy, honesty, justice, and innocence. Throughout the history of every culture and religions, these are the qualities that have been recognized in people who are wise. Next on the continuum. And this, knowledge comes from learning. Wisdom comes from living. And next on the continuum is discernment without understanding. And understanding I'm talking about is spiritual understanding. The understanding we talked about, one of the powers, a few months ago. Being in place of wisdom makes it easier for us to say that we're using discernment to make decisions and judgments in our life. The next box on the circle, a simple definition of discernment is the ability to obtain sharp perceptions or to judge well. It can be psychological or moral in nature. The ability to grasp and comprehend something obscure. And you'll notice on my circle, I've placed two types of discernment. Most people probably wouldn't do this, and I acknowledge I do it simply because of my personal experiences. But if we use discernment without spiritual understanding, which is that ability to gain direct perceptions of truth from the divine, then a big piece of the spiritual power of discernment is missing. That's why if you ask someone how they came to a conclusion, as I did in my newsletter example, and their answer is discernment, and you know they've left out a big piece of the truth, then it's hard to believe that their discernment is with understanding. Because my God is a God of truth. So though you may be a very spiritual person, if you fail to engage with others in a loving, truthful, spiritual way, you may be leaving a step out of your discernment practice. And that step makes a difference whether you're in complete integrity or not. As an example, when we choose sides about an issue, if you just look at what's been going on in our world, our country the last week, when we choose sides and we feel like, and everybody feels like their side is the right side always, but we know that we've chosen the side of good and compassion and kindness, that is discernment. But it might not be the whole story. If we haven't gone deeper, if we haven't really interacted, as in the case of, let's just take racism. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but let's just take racism. If we definitely do not come down, I think I can speak for pretty much everyone in this room, on the side of bigotry, hate, and violence. We would come down on the side of love, compassion, and oneness. That's absolutely a good place to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we could be missing a piece, and that piece I'm talking about is, have we really engaged the issue? Have we really spoken with? Are we really talking to the people involved, or are we just putting a post on Facebook? Are we really listening? What is the issue? What is the grievance? If we don't listen to the real grievance, which may not have anything to do with symbols, but everything to do with feelings, we will never find the solution. So that's what I'm talking about, going deeper. So, but even in a situation where it's discernment without complete understanding, all things work together for good. But just remember, there could be some hurt feelings we could have avoided by simply seeing every person involved as a child of God who deserves to be acknowledged and heard. So we come to the final box: discernment with understanding. This could be named the "don't believe everything you hear" box. This is the one where you get all the information you can from everyone involved, plus guidance from your divine source. Several years ago, Alan Smith, a blogger, received the following email message: "You have just received the West Virginia virus. As we have no programming experience, the virus works on the honor system. Please delete all the files from your hard drive and manually forward this virus to everyone on your mailing list. Thanks for your cooperation. West Virginia University Computer Engineering Department." And in parentheses, incidentally, feel free to substitute the state school of your choice when you pass this on to your friends. He thought this was humorous and passed it along to several of his friends. Shortly thereafter, he received the following brief message from one of them: "Done. Is that all?" The thought that someone might take him seriously and literally delete every file from their hard drive was a bit concerning to him. And fortunately, as it turns out, she didn't really do that. She was just having fun with him in return. But it does remind us to be careful about believing everything we hear, even from trusted friends. John warned in 1 John 4:1, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. So discernment is judging things the way they really are. And the only true way to do that is to seek guidance from your spiritual GPS, your divine source. You seek to find the truth of the circumstance of life by assessing your inner wisdom. You do this without adding the comparison factor or thinking about how things should be, but rather you seek God's truth in the matter. That's the kind of discernment we hope will be used when others interact with us, and therefore the kind we want to use with others. To use discernment with understanding, you must actually have a real conversation with people, not just post what you're thinking, as I said, on Facebook. You have to ask thoughtful questions and listen to everyone's side of the story. Though we seem to be on the side of people who are not like us, we must actually talk to them to see if we're getting it right. If we're really addressing their true grievances, what would actually create the solution? For this type of discernment, in addition to checking in with others involved, checking in with the divine is mandatory. So, have I experienced all of these types of judgment? Yes, as both the giver and the receiver. Do I always achieve discernment with understanding? Absolutely not. But I can tell you that I have reached the point that I can call myself out for it and work always to get there. And my prayer for myself and for you is the same one Paul offered to the Philippians. And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment. Discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It is knowing the difference between right and almost right.